everyone, and welcome to episode 23 of What to Think, the technology news podcast from VentureBeat.com. I'm VentureBeat's editor-in-chief, Dylan Tweeney, and I'm here with Jordan Novett, who is our intrepid cloud and data and nerdy things reporter.
And also Elo reporter.
And Elo, really? You're our Elo reporter? We have an Elo Beat reporter?
Oh yeah, all over it.
Okay, which actually you can find us on Elo at VentureBeat.
At elo.co, not com.
elo.co/VentureBeat.
Yep.
All right, today, speaking of nerdy things, we're going to be talking to Ben Golub, the CEO of Docker, one of the hottest and buzziest cloud startups around. But first, some tech news highlights from VentureBeat. Here are three stories that I've picked that I think are interesting and were quite popular on our site. Microsoft's announcement of Windows 10. Now, wait a minute, Jordan. Mm-hmm. What happened to 9? I thought 9 was what comes after 8.
You know, you would think. Actually, one of the executives said 7, 8, 9, the old math joke that I used to hear when I was like 8 years old. But
that's a math joke?
Why was 6 afraid of 7? Because 7, 8, 9. But actually, you never heard that? What? Okay, so anyway, you'd think that that's what happens, but they're like, no, it's not an incremental update. And no, we're not going to be that predictable Microsoft that you would think we would be. We're not one Microsoft, we're not OneDrive, and we're not going to do something in that vein. We want to show how much we've evolved. We're going to come out with Windows 10.
I will say they've never been shy about numbering. They went Windows 1, 2, 3, and then they went to Windows 95, and then Windows XP, and then, God
Vista?
knows what, Vista, right. And then it was Windows 7, 8, and now 10. So, I mean, who knows? I'm not going to obsess about the numbering.
They don't know how to count, really.
Yeah, but pretty much. Doesn't give you a lot of confidence from the maker of Excel if they don't actually know how to count them. What is the key to Windows 10? I mean, it sounds a little bit like they're backing away from the crazy start screen, touch-centric motif. Maybe not totally, but they brought the start button back.
That is true. The start button, the start menu is back.
Yes.
The start screen is diminished, we could say. And I think that's fine from what big-time Microsoft Windows users tell me. Devindra weighed in on this a little bit after, and he said some awesome things, and I'm just going to...
VentureBeat writer Devindra Hardawar.
Yes. He said that there are some features that you would think you would have used in Windows 8, but actually, got annoying.
Well, he's talking about like the gestures, right? Like swiping up to the right corner to bring up the start bar, whatever it's called, the charms menu and all that stuff.
And also, he pointed out that Microsoft is finally getting around to putting its Windows 8 Metro apps in actual windows instead of like a sliver of that start screen.
Thank God.
Yeah, so they did that.
I appreciate that. I have to say, this whole start menu, start screen business, I think people are whiners. I actually think the start menu and the start screen are basically the same thing. They're just presented in a different way.
Yep.
And the gestures never really bothered me. Once you get used to them, they're very easy. But clearly, they annoyed a lot of people, and a lot of people use Windows. So it's good on Microsoft for listening.
One other thing that I should point out is that if you are using one of these 2-in-1 gadgets, like a Surface, you can use the keyboard or you can touch the screen. And the start menu UI changes based on whether you're using the keyboard or not.
Oh, that's clever. So I don't have to try to touch a tiny little button or menu item with the tip of my pinky finger.
It knows you're using your keys.
Thank God. Okay. When do we think we'll actually get Windows 10?
They were saying mid next year. And if you are an insider, then you will get access Wednesday, October the 1st.
By the time you listen to our voices, you will be able to download the beta version of Windows 10. How exciting.
Well, let me just say, what should we think about it? Because my thought was it didn't seem like that big of a change.
Here's what I think, and here's what you should think.
Okay, thank you.
Windows 8 was actually more successful than a lot of people gave it credit for being. Microsoft was trying very hard to push the touchscreen interface. They probably pushed a little bit too hard. Windows 10 appears to be, now I haven't used it yet, but it appears to be an attempt to appease the people who are put off by the exclusive touchscreen interface. I think it's probably smart for Microsoft to do that.
Devindra says, Windows 10 seems to embrace the desktop entirely and not just focus all on the touchscreen. So cautiously optimistic that they're thinking of people using PCs again.
All right. Well, they may be or they may not be. One thing that is for sure is people are starting new companies. And to cash in on this trend, Stanford is now offering a class in startups taught by some of the most successful tech founders in the Valley. Day one of the class Featured Sam Altman, the head of Y Combinator, and Dustin Moskovitz, a co-founder of Facebook and of some other stuff. Asana, thank you. And as you might expect, at Stanford, where I think every student wants to start a company, at this point, the class was packed. You can actually watch the full lecture. It's online. You can find it on VentureBeat.com. The video is embedded in a post. But there's some interesting nuggets here. For instance, they said you should never start a startup just for doing so. There are much easier ways to get rich. The passion should come first and the startup second. They also advise you that it's very important to get to know a lot of potential co-founders. So
they love co-founders over there. They're all about, if you don't have a co-founder, then you're ruined.
I have to say that's probably practical because the days of the solo entrepreneur starting a company by himself or herself probably never existed.
I love it though. Secretly, between you and me, I like it when there's a single founder.
You want to do a solo startup?
I never said that.
Even a single founder is going to have to recruit people to work with her.
That's true.
That's just a fact. So they say, get out there, go to those meetups, go socialize a little bit. And they also say, when really successful startup founders tell the story of their early days, it's almost always sitting in front of the computer, tap, 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 working on their product, talking to customers pretty much all the time. They do little else. So, it just takes work. Apply seat to chair time. I encourage you to watch the video. If you don't have time to watch the video, we have 11 tips that Greg Ferenstein, our writer, culled from the video so you can get the nuggets of wisdom.
And I would just throw in the last one that I loved because it used the word love. They said it's better to build something that a small number of users love than a large number of users like. And that is so freaking true. If I'm just ambivalent about technology, I'm going to forget it. I'm going to move on to the thing that I can't stop using.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like Ello.
And Trello.
Ello and Trello. Pro tip, PR people out there, if you want Jordan to be excited about your product, make sure it ends in Ello. I'm going to tell you about a product that I'm not excited about. I wrote a post this week called Why I'm Not Buying an iPhone 6. And it was partly tongue-in-cheek, partly satire, which is lost on the internet. There were lots of comments and reactions to the post saying I'm a complete idiot and I couldn't believe why that Samsung had paid me to write this post. Some of these reasons were actually legitimate. For instance, I'm not buying an iPhone 6 because I don't want to be a beta tester. I don't want to be the one finding out that HealthKit doesn't work or that I can't actually make phone calls. I'm going to wait a little bit, for Apple to sort out the problems.
Okay, legitimate.
I'm not buying an iPhone 6 because Android has had features like swipe to delete on email messages and customizable keyboards for about 4 years.
True.
So I'm just going to sit over here and be smug. You're like, fine, you iPhone 6 people. You can enjoy that. I've had it for 4 years. I'm not buying an iPhone 6 because I'm opposed to the closed system that Apple enforces. For instance, you can only use its continuity features, which let you respond to text messages on your computer with OS X. And I just like kind of feeling superior, honestly, as an Android guy with my Nexus 5. So I don't know. Jordan, tell the people what to think about the iPhone 6.
If you care anything about Dylan being a supporter of what you're doing, you're not going to buy an iPhone 6. You're going to, choose at least 5 of these reasons to get behind. And then next time you run into him, you'll be like saying the same exact words that he did in his column. It's a great column.
No doubt.
And come up with more reasons. Put them in the comments.
There are 21 reasons. The truth is I'm probably going to be repeating these 21 reasons for about 2 months, and then I'll get an iPhone 6.
What about a Windows phone running OS Microsoft Windows 10? God, it's coming.
I've gone the Windows phone route. I'm not going back. But let's move on because we have a guest and a sponsor message first. For all this and more tech news, you know where to go, VentureBeat.com. But first, I want to give a quick thanks to our host and sponsor, New Relic, a software analytics company that makes sense of billions of metrics across millions of web and mobile apps. Next week, New Relic is holding their second annual event called FutureStack 14. It's a tech and user conference. It's happening in San Francisco at the Fort Mason Center on Wednesday and Thursday, October 8th and 9th. You can get a discount using this super secret VentureBeat code. Just use the promo code VentureBeat, and you will get 50% off beta tickets. Jordan will be there. I'll be there. I hear there's all kinds of cool things happening there.
Like OK Go.
OK Go, exactly. And no doubt many other wonderful things. So we will see you there.
And now, here's our guest, Ben Golub. He's the CEO of Docker, the latest and greatest right now as cloud startups go. I write about them all the time. Companies big and small are building on top of what Docker created. And Ben gets to make the executive decisions at that company that's actually right around the corner from VentureBeat in San Francisco. Ben was previously the president and CEO of the storage startup Gluster, which Red Hat bought in 2011. And Docker just got a $40 million round of funding it doesn't even need yet, and we can ask him about that. So Ben, welcome to What to Think.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
I'll kick this off because Jordan is our resident data and cloud nerd, and he's the one who first got really excited about Docker last year when he started covering it. But as a less technical tech journalist, I'm curious what the hype is about. Like I've read Jordan's story, so I actually kind of know the answer. But how do you explain it to a lay person? Like, why is it that the world is so abuzz about Docker right now?
What I'd say is that almost every major tech trend of the last several years has been at sort of a fundamental disconnect with the existing infrastructure. So most of the existing infrastructure and tools that were built, including the VM, were built assuming that applications were going to live a long time, and that they were monolithic, and that they were run on a single server. Mm-hmm. And, the truth of the matter is all three of those things are no longer true. Apps are very short-lived and constantly updated. They're built out of lots of sort of modular, loose-coupled components, and they want to run across thousands of servers and move between servers. And Docker really makes that new model possible in a much lower footprint way, a much more dynamic way than sort of any of the existing tools would have allowed.
I mean, as I understand it, right, it containerizes applications or parts of applications. Is that right? So you can sort of take them and run them on your development laptop and then just kind of throw the same container up to the cloud when you're ready to deploy it. Am I oversimplifying?
No, I think that the fundamental thing is that a Docker container is kind of analogous to a shipping container in the physical world, and that you can put almost anything on the inside, but the outside always stays the same and can therefore lend itself to automation and moving between different environments. And so with Docker, you can take any application or portion of an application or version of an application and know that it will run consistently on any server from the developer's laptop through test, QA, production, push it up to Amazon, move it to a VM, bring it back down to a different data center, et cetera. And that it will update in a really lightweight, constant way.
Okay, so this is interesting. Okay, now this is what you're saying echoes some of what we used to hear, 10 or 15 years ago when Java was new, right? People would say that you'd write once and deploy anywhere, and you could run Java code on your desktop or in your browser or on the server. It didn't actually wind up being that simple because those were wildly different environments and they had different capabilities and different needs, right? So, but what you're doing is something different than a kind of universal language, right? This is, in a way, it sounds a little more circumscribed. This is like a deployment or an operational kind of tool more than a...
Yeah, I mean, you can write an application in almost any language. Today, as long as it's sort of some kind of Linux application, put it inside of Docker, and Docker both does a lot and does a little, right? So that we try and draw the interface really clearly between the world of applications, which change rapidly and have a lot of dynamism, and the world of infrastructure where you want things to be, relatively consistent and predictable. And by doing that, not only do we sort of make portability a factor, but we also make it really easy to build a huge ecosystem around us. So there's, some 40,000 Dockerized applications that are free for developers to use as they start to build their applications. And there's some 13,000 Docker-related projects now on GitHub that are everything from a UI to management tools to integrations with existing things like Salt and Puppet and Chef and Ansible, et cetera.
Mm-hmm. Now, Ben, I've written about not all 13,000 of those, but a few of them.
It just seems like 13,000.
Because I always have
I noticed you missed one or two in your last article.
Yeah, sorry about that, Ben. I'll work on it this week. So I actually have what I think is a fairly good question. How do you keep track of all those projects and all those people who are behind the projects and maybe all the companies that are building technology based on the Docker technology you open sourced last year? How do you map it all? Do you have one big map in the office on your desk, or how do you put it in your brain and keep it fresh because it's changing so freaking fast?
We can certainly see it all on GitHub. We can certainly have a good handle on which are the most popular or the most active. The truth of the matter is you can no more manage a vibrant open source community than you can sort of centrally plan an economy. You sort of have to embrace the chaos and embrace the whole Darwinian nature of it and say, okay, the best tools are going to emerge somehow. by the invisible hand as opposed to my direct hand or anybody at Docker's direct.
So you don't have some kind of predictive analytics application that says, this is going to be a competitor, this is going to be a competitor.
Well, we certainly try and set up the right kind of frameworks for people to work with Docker, and we have a governance rule and things like that. But the truth of the matter is, we want it to be an open source platform that was wildly successful. And what that means is that inevitably there are going to be competitors, and given that we have to concentrate on both the platform and the things that are built on top of the platform, some of them are going to be ahead of us, and that's okay.
So Ben, you went open source about a year and a half ago, right? Or you open sourced the basic.
Right.
What has the effect been on the Docker community since that happened?
It's been outstanding. I mean, the predecessor to Docker was an internal proprietary tool that we used at DocCloud, which was the previous company. And since open sourcing it, we've gone from having, a few hundred users to having, I think at the latest count, something like 30 million downloads of Docker and growing by double digits every week. We've seen this explosion of tools and technologies around us. We have pretty much every major tech company wanting to partner with us.
Yep.
And we've seen huge adoption, not only web companies, but now in the more sort of traditional enterprise. It's been huge.
That to me has been the really interesting part. It's like one thing for a cool San Francisco startup that works above our offices to start using Docker. And then they come and say, Jordan, we're using Docker. And I say, oh, cool. That's interesting. But it's something totally different when like these big old companies start using it alongside their existing tooling, including virtual machines. And we talked about a month ago around the funding. How has that evolved, and how do you see it evolving further? Is it eventually going to replace the virtual machine at like Nordstrom's or something?
It doesn't need to. So you can adopt Docker in an environment that has VMs. You can run Docker on VMs. You can run it on bare metal. You can run it in the cloud, and actually you can get a combination of all of those things. So, what has been very exciting to us is that Docker moved pretty rapidly from the cool web startups to the more established, big web companies like Gilt and Groupon and eBay and the like. Now, pretty much every major bank and healthcare companies and government agencies who are certainly more conservative in their outlook, but they're already starting Docker pilots. And, what I'd say is the people who care more about performance and economics than sort of squeezing the last bit out are running Docker on bare metal, and those who are in a more regulated environment are starting out with Docker on VMware, and we sort of are happy either way.
Does Docker itself impose is there a performance cost to using it? Does it slow things down?
No, actually there's a nice 65-page study that was done by folks at IBM comparing Docker to the VM and bare metal across a whole bunch of different parameters, and there was no distinguishable difference between Docker and bare metal in terms of overhead. And then when you compared us to VMs, depending on the parameter, it was anywhere from 25 to 50% better to, if you look at something like density, 80 times better.
Nice.
I think it's always been interesting with you to talk about making a really big company based on this technology. Mm-hmm. What are your latest plans to go public? How are you going to basically build a really big company that has these huge revenues quarter after quarter and, one day drive around in a limousine everywhere or a helicopter?
Because we'll know you're successful when you're riding around in your own helicopter then.
Oh, no. I'm going to go for a Segway. That's cool.
Oh, you really are a nerd CEO.
Well, how do you describe yourself? A cloud geek nerd, and that's me. But I think in terms of monetization, it's pretty straightforward to us. I mean, there's three paths that we're pursuing right now, and I'll sort of go from least interesting to most interesting. So least interesting right now, we're providing commercial support, but sort of similar to the Red Hat model. We've also launched a set of hosted services around content collaboration and workflow that's sort of similar to GitHub and work on the same premium hosted model. And then finally, lots and lots of enterprises have been coming to us lately saying, hey, we sort of want the vSphere equivalent for Docker, tools that let us know where every Docker container came from, where it's running, set policies, scale up, scale down, et cetera. And that we'll be delivering as commercial software alongside of Docker.
That's interesting. That sort of parallels the arc that a lot of enterprise technologies have been taking recently, where somebody adopts them within an enterprise and gets really excited about it, starts deploying it, their friends, their department, their team start using it. And then IT comes along and they're like, oh my God, we've got to get control of this, or at least understand what's going on, right?
The only golf I play is on courses with windmills and dragon heads. But there's no way that even I did play golf, or lots of people at our company played golf, that we could play golf with every CIO of every major bank or enterprise. But with Docker, we can wake up and say, hey, we know in every major enterprise there's somebody who's playing around with Docker and doing a pilot. And what is nice is that actually not the situation you described where IT gets angry, but in fact IT sees the developers using this and say, wow, this can be a really powerful tool for us too. And at that point they call us and we can explore things like management tools or commercial support that make sense.
Okay, so I have a question about open source, and this is not a question about Docker's open source in general, but I want to, since you're an open source company now, I want to know what the mood in the tech industry and investors is towards companies that have open source as a major part of their strategy. Because it seems to me there have been some really high-profile successes like Red Hat, Ubuntu. I could name a bunch, right? But there have been some really prominent successes in the last decade or so. But also recently, I think kind of the shine has started to come off open source a little bit as we've seen, major security vulnerabilities like Heartbleed that come out of open source projects that are sort of managed by the community, but there's nobody really paying close attention to something that turns out to be a really critical flaw, right? And I'm not suggesting that any of that is the case with Docker because, it's still clearly very much owned by you guys. But is there a sense in the Valley that open source is less exciting than it used to be as a strategy?
I'd say quite the contrary. I mean, I think if you look at almost everything exciting that's happening in the enterprise world, whether it's Hadoop or Mongo or Elasticsearch or us or Android for that matter, right? I mean, almost every exciting new platform that's coming out is open source.
I guess I'm wondering if there's a little bit of a different flavor. It's not like the Cathedral and Bazaar kind of Eric Raymond. We are expecting massive numbers of people to contribute to the core, right?
Well, I mean, I think that there are things that are open, but all the contributions come from one company, and then there are things like Docker that are more sort of community-driven. I think regardless, things that are open have tended to win. I think we've now started to see a lot of really successful commercial companies being built. And as far as the security thing goes, I would argue, Heartbleed aside, that there are far more vulnerabilities that are out there on proprietary platforms than there are on open source platforms, just because there are a lot more eyes that are looking at the open source. And then for Docker, what we managed to achieve, so we have 55 people in the company, and our community of contributors is about 650. So clearly there's this, huge community of people who are working on Docker that don't work directly for Docker. And we've reached a point where about 75% of the lines of code come from within the company, but a huge long tail as well as several significant components are coming from the broader community. And I think that feels to me about the right balance. It's still got a clear direction in the same way that the Linux project still has a clear direction, but we have a vibrant community that can take us in different directions, expand us in different ways, bang on us for security and performance, et cetera.
Mm-hmm. Cool. And people have been actually banging on you about security specifically.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about some of the complaints that come from some startups that say there are some security risks, and also the VMware executives who on stage at VMworld earlier this summer were like, hey, we're going to make it enterprise ready. I asked you at a press conference after that, like, wait a second, is the Docker container not secure? I just wonder how you address that and how much room you cede when people start complaining about that.
Well, look, Docker is an 18-month-old technology, so it has some rough edges, but it's built on top of low-level container technology that has been banged on for 10 years.
What's that, by the way, for all our curious listeners?
There's a lot of technology that's gone into Linux. Well, you call them like C groups and namespaces, but they basically provide isolation of anything inside a Docker container from other applications, right? So that you can be running 100 containers on the same physical host and not have them interact with each other in a bad way. There are still, of course, good ways and bad ways to use Docker, and we try and make sure that the bad ways aren't used by default. So that in terms of actual real security, in many ways, Docker can be far more secure than a VM, simply because with every VM you have a guest operating system. So if you have 1,000 potential apps as VMs, you have 1,000 potential slight differences in the operating system, each of which can have a vulnerability that's hard to patch. In the case of Docker, you can have a hardened operating system and a set of small apps that are in containers that are easy to update. So you actually can make it much easier to secure. But that having been said, people are appropriately conservative in the security field, and some people say, hey, the best thing to do is to put a Docker container inside a VM.
Yeah.
Or other people put VMs inside of Docker containers, and that's fine because layered security always provides an additional safety measure.
Okay. So one thing that I've been having to type a lot of keystrokes about lately is OpenStack. And there have been acquisitions, there have been product announcements. Like every other week, it feels like there's another big OpenStack move. And just recently, Pivotal hired one of the leaders of one of the hottest OpenStack startups, that being Piston, Joshua McKenty, who helped create OpenStack and was at NASA actually, just moved there. And so there's so much interest there. Also, I can think of Cisco building their intercloud around the world, this cloud system all around the world based on OpenStack, and also HP buying Eucalyptus. So anyway, I'm wondering if we're going to see that same, merger and acquisition activity in Docker if Docker containers are, more secure than VMs in a certain way, in a certain frame of mind. How long until that happens?
I think there's been a ton of excitement around Docker.
No question about that, yeah.
There are lots of startups that are forming in the Docker ecosystem. Obviously, we had our funding event. Lots of companies finding different ways to use Docker. Lots of existing companies trying to incorporate Docker. So I'm sure that there will be some, consolidation and winnowing out at some point in the Docker ecosystem. And what I'd say is it's complementary to the OpenStack ecosystem, in that, OpenStack is a way to make your infrastructure more flexible. Docker's a way to make your application delivery more flexible, regardless of what infrastructure you're using.
We'll have to wrap up here in just a minute, but I want to ask you one more question, which is, Docker aside, suppose you're talking to some, a younger person who's considering creating a startup or looking for a startup to join in technology. What areas of tech are you really excited about right now? Where would you guide them? Where do you think there's the most kind of future potential for somebody who wants to get on a train that's going places?
My first order of advice is that if they're young, they should do it. It doesn't get easier to do a startup. It gets harder as you get kids and mortgages and things like that.
That's very true, by the way.
Yeah, I have people who talk to me who are just out of school and they say, well, I need to work at an established company because I have student debt. And I feel like saying, well, what? Are they going to repossess your education? But quite seriously, actually, the second thing is that there are a lot of technology areas that excite me, but I think the most important thing is it's got to excite them. Mm-hmm. If you're going to be at a startup, you have to be prepared to put your heart and soul into it for, I think the average time to having some kind of exit, be it positive or negative, is now 7 years. So, you've got to believe that what you're doing inspires you, you're passionate about it, and it's going to change the world, and it's not just a slightly better, slightly faster, slight wrinkle on some other business model somebody else has. I'm excited about cloud. I'm excited about big data. I'm excited about applications. I'm excited about infrastructure. Other people.
All growth areas.
All the buzzwords.
Yep.
But, before I took the Docker job, I was pitched something which was, because I've done consumer too, which was basically Foursquare, but you check out rather than check in. I think that would be an example of something that you want to stay away from.
Yeah, I think you made the right choice there.
I find out where my friends aren't anymore.
Yeah, exactly. I don't get that.
It'll probably be a multi-billion-dollar.
Yeah, exactly.
And I'll be sitting here.
Well, Ben, thank you so much for taking time to talk with us today. I'm really glad that you could share your perspective on the tech industry and some details on Docker as well.
Thanks a lot, Ben.
Thank you, guys. This is great.
And thank you, listeners, for joining us for What to Think, VentureBeat's technology news podcast. As always, you can find us online at VentureBeat.com. And if you haven't subscribed to our podcast in iTunes yet, what are you thinking? Just search for What to Think on iTunes, and we'll catch you again next week.
See you later.